So, if you're keeping an eye on real estate in the Greater Toronto Area, you're probably hearing two totally different stories. On one hand, it's a gentle cool down. On the other, it's a total free fall. It's pretty confusing, right? Well, today we're going to cut through all that noise, look at the very latest data, and figure out what's really going on.
To really wrap our heads around this, you first have to understand the two competing stories that are out there right now. These are the narratives shaping how everyone, from buyers to sellers to the government, is reacting. On one side, you have the official line, and on the other, well, something a lot more dramatic.
And this is where you can really see that split. The Toronto Regional Real Estate Board, or TREB, they use this very careful language, like a modest increase in home sales and prices being negotiated downward. It sounds so controlled, so calm. But then you've got market commentators looking at the exact same month and calling it the second worst August for sales in over a decade. A free fall. So, who's right?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? When the stories are this different, you just have to go straight to the numbers. So let's push the narratives aside for a moment and see what the data from August is actually telling us.
All right, let's dive in. Time to look at the market by the numbers. And we're going to start with the one everyone watches the most. The price. What does it actually cost to buy a home in the GTA right now? And there it is. The average price for a home across the Greater Toronto Area in August was sitting at just over $1 million. But a big number like that, on its own, it doesn't really tell the whole story, does it? The real story is always in the trend. Is that number going up or is it going down? And yeah, the trend is definitely pointing downwards. Compared to this exact same time last year, the average price has dropped by 5.2%. So that tells you there's been some clear downward pressure for a while. But that's just the year-over-year picture. The drop from the absolute peak, that's even more dramatic.
And this number, right here, this is what's pouring gasoline on that freefall fire. Since the market peaked back in March of 2023, the benchmark price, which is what tracks a typical home, has fallen by over $400,000. That is a staggering drop from the market's recent highs.
So we know what's happening with prices. They're down. But the bigger question is why? To figure that out, we have to go back to basics. Economics 101, supply and demand. And wow, this chart right here pretty much says it all. In August, you had over 14,000 new listings hit the market. But in that same period, only about 5,200 homes were actually sold. That huge gap you see between those two bars, that's the core of the issue right now. There is just way more supply than there is demand to soak it all up.
And the result of that huge imbalance? A massive pileup of inventory. With nearly 27,500 homes actively for sale, the number of available listings is at its highest point for August in more than a decade. For buyers, this means more choice and, more importantly, more negotiating power than they've had in a very, very long time.
So there's actually a technical way that analysts measure this imbalance. It's a key metric called the sales to new listings ratio. And it's pretty simple, actually. You just divide the number of sales by the number of new listings. Anything below 40% is usually considered a buyer's market. And in August, the GTA's ratio was 37%. The data is crystal clear. Buyers are officially in the driver's seat. Now, this whole market shift isn't just happening on spreadsheets. It has real-world consequences for affordability. And, as you'd expect, it's getting a ton of attention from the government. You might think, hey, prices are falling, that's great for affordability. But it's not quite that simple. Here's what TREB's Chief Information Officer is saying. He points out that even with prices coming down, a family earning an average income is still finding it incredibly tough to afford a mortgage. So the price drop hasn't magically solved the core problem. The government, though, is singing a slightly different tune. The housing minister, Gregor Robertson, recently framed this price drop as definitely helpful for people who are trying to get into the market. It's a really interesting shift in tone, framing this market correction as a net positive. But, not everyone's buying that this hands-off approach is going to last forever. Market commentator Mark Mitchell asks the critical question, if prices keep falling and that starts to cause wider economic pain, will the government really stick to its no bailout policy? That's a key tension we should all be watching. All right, so we've looked at the prices, we've looked at supply and demand, and we've looked at the political spin. Let's try to pull it all together. After seeing all the data, where does the GTA housing market truly stand right now? And this right here, this is exactly how you can look at the same set of facts and come up with two totally different headlines. If you want to argue it's a cool down, you can point to that small 2.3% year-over-year increase in sales. But if you want to scream crash, you can point out that those are still the second lowest August sales in 12 years. Both sides can grab a stat and run with it.
So where does that leave us? What's the real verdict? Well, it looks like it's somewhere in the middle. That free fall and crash language isn't just hype. The market is under some serious, undeniable pressure, especially with all that inventory. But at the same time, it hasn't completely imploded. It's a market caught in a very, very precarious balance.
And that, of course, leaves us with the ultimate question. With the supply of homes sitting at a 12-year high and all eyes on what the Bank of Canada is going to do with interest rates, what happens next? The next few months are going to tell us if this is a painful but maybe necessary correction, or if it's the beginning of something much, much bigger.